So in this lesson, I'm going to focus on Google, and then I'll create another lesson for doing this same lab, but in Excel. So this is the Google version. I'm going to follow the directions pretty much exactly as they're laid out here. So the first step is to open the Google Sheet. And if we right click, again, PC, if I right click and open in new tab, I get a new tab up here, Math Emporium Lab 1 Probability. Notice it says View Only, and I can only view it. Do not request edit access. You will not be given it. Instead, following the directions that are provided, save a copy. So we're going to go File and Make a Copy. When we do that, File, Make a Copy, change the name, click OK, we're going to get our own copy with whatever we named it. We can close that Lab 1 tab and only work in our file. So here we have, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. So the toolbar up top should look familiar. We've got some of the same things that you see in pretty much any editing program, word processing program. Using my mouse to point out some things. Columns are labeled with the letters and rows are labeled with numbers. So if I'm looking at this student 2 here, notice that I am in column B, row 12. And you can see that right up here in the little corner, B12. It's an address of where my cursor is currently sitting. You can see that it's highlighted in blue right now. I've got a print button, I've got an undo and a redo, a paint format, so similar things that you see with editing software. And then we have a format as currency, so if we were dealing with money, maybe we want that button. Format as percent, this is decreased decimal places, increased decimal places, and more formats that we can change the numbers to. Sometimes the spreadsheet apps will do some strange things. An example, if you go to put in a date, like January 26th, sometimes the spreadsheet app is okay with that. But other times it may change it to a complete number, like a whole number, and it looks really weird. So we may have to go in and format that cell to display the date that we want instead of it trying to display a number. But right now we don't have to worry too much about that. Note we've got font size, we've got some bold, italics, etc. Fill color means we can basically paint a cell a color. We can add borders, and then we've got some indentations and such. Font color is here, so we can change the text color. Again, we can change the cell color. We call each of these individual boxes cells. So I'm in cell C6 right now, and I can tell that right here on my toolbar. Alright, and then one more thing to point out with spreadsheets, unlike documents you can have multiple pages and it just adds another page to the end. After the first page it gives you a second page and so forth. For spreadsheet programs, it's not quite like that. If we scroll down, we can just keep going and those numbers will count up. We just keep scrolling and they keep counting. Or if we scroll over, in this case we can't because this is a locked sheet. We can keep going to the right for however long it will let us. So the spreadsheet itself is pretty large. Instead of putting everything on just one spreadsheet though, spreadsheets have tabs. So I'm going to lift this up. And if I lift up my spreadsheet here, you can see along the bottom we have these different listings. These are called tabs. And if I click on a tab, I get a new sheet. So I get a new sheet every time I click on. And if I wanted to add a sheet, this little plus sign right down here will allow me to add a new sheet to my spreadsheet. I can look at all of the sheets together, see that they're all named. So the first 5 came with me making a copy. And the 6th one is the one that I just added. And we can change the name, go over to the spreadsheet and right click. We can rename it and change things around. Let's go back to Lab 1, tab, and we're going to start looking at moving through this lab assignment. So step 2, time to practice. Locate the Lab 1 Part 1 tab at the bottom of your window. Locate cell A3. left click into that cell. Left click just means select. Select it, make sure that you're on it. And then you can type into the cell. Locate cell B5. So we can type into the cells. We can write whatever we want to. If I click on the cell again and I just start typing, it automatically overwrites what's already there. What if I didn't want to do that? Well, make use of that undo button. Let's click off of that first, and then click undo, and then I'm able to fix it. I'm able to correct it. Or, if I'm on the cell and I type hello, if I don't hit enter, I can hit escape. Escape allows me to erase what I just had, and it goes back to the way it was before. So we have two ways of undoing a mistake in Google. Now, if I want to edit what's inside my cell, I can't just click on it and start typing. We just saw that it would overwrite it. So you can do one of two things. You can double click into it and then make sure that your cursor is on the end, and then you can type. Or come up here to what's called the function bar, and we can edit the information up top. Again, multiple ways to correct or to change. And this is a feature in Excel and Google. Both of them will do this. Okay, the next lab step is to make the cell bigger. Well, up here with the AVC, with the cell, the column labels, notice if we go close to the edge of the column, our mouse changes. Our cursor changes to a new type. Excel and Google make use of this cursor change in many ways. There are several different types of cursors that happen while you're navigating these programs. And so this one is allowing me to increase or decrease a column size. And I can do the same over here with the row. I can make the row wider or narrower for the same way. I just get close to the edge and I see that my cursor changes. So when your cursor changes, that engages new functions within the program. Okay, next we're going to fill the cell to match our color. Well, we already have a bright pink text in there, but I need to fill inside, so I'm gonna make it a light blue because blue is my favorite color, but you pick your favorite color. I actually like a turquoisey color, so let me see if I can get that a little bit more greenish blue going on there. And then if I wanted to change the text, instead of being a weird pink, maybe I want it to be something different. And you can change the color for the text as well. If I'm on the cell, when I change the text, it changes the text in the entire cell. If I didn't want that, if I only wanted some of the color changed, I would need to go back up to this function bar, highlight it, and then change it. Okay. Next step, A15 through B22, we see a table. And sure enough, here's our table. Add some flair. I'll leave that for you to try on your own. But if you encounter any problems with adding a border and colors and centering the headers, whatever, send me a message. The idea with this part of the lab is to explore and play. Play with what's here. Know what you're able to do and how you're able to do it. Recognize that you can align only part of a sheet. You don't have to do the whole sheet. Lots of options. All right. Now we're going to look at the probability sheet in the lab. We have results from 32 students who flipped coins. They flipped 4 coins, a penny, a nickel, a dime, and a quarter. And you can do that same thing. Take a penny, a nickel, a dime, a quarter, or take one coin and flip it 40 times. Flip each coin 10 times and write your results down in the table. And then summarize how many heads, how many tails for each of the coins, probability for flipping a head for each coin that you calculated. And so that should be heads divided by 10 for each one of these cells. And then the theoretical probability. What's that theoretical probability? We talked about that in the first lesson. What's the probability when we flip a coin that the coin lands on heads? So here in cell B23, type out, compare the empirical and the theoretical that you got. Talk about similarities and differences. Explain why those differences occurred. And what is nice about Excel and Google typing something pretty nonsensical, notice that as long as nothing is next to the cell that I'm typing in, I can just keep typing in that cell and the sentence will just keep going. The space will keep going. It's when I start to type in a cell that it overlaps that it'll cut off that sentence. So there's nothing that we need to type in the boxes to the right of cell B23. So just freeform type it. If you want to keep it all on the same page and you want to enter into the next line on B24, that's perfectly fine too. If for some reason you need more than 3 lines here, if we come over to B20 or to row 24 or row 25, it doesn't matter. If I right click, I can insert a row above or below. I can add a new row. So be aware that you can do that. Insert one above, insert one below. We could delete a row. We could clear the row. Clear the row just means to take all the information out of it. It doesn't mean to actually delete the row and make it go away. So a little bit of difference there between delete and clear. And we have the same things up top. If I click on a column and I right click, insert one left column, insert a column to the right, delete the column, clear the column. Those are some commands that might be helpful as well. And so step 3, comparing your experiment. So we go back to the first tab, highlight a student, randomly pick a student. I'm going to pick student 26 and highlight their entire table starting in column A. So I'm going to highlight the entire table starting in column A. Right click anywhere in the highlighted area to bring up the menu. Copy option up at the top, so we'll click that. I'll go back to Lab 1 Part 2. And it says right click into cell G3. So I'm going to come over here. Now you should have data here. I'm not on purpose because I want you to do that part. And I'm going to click Paste and scroll over so that we can see student 26's data has been pasted. So we're able to see it. And then this same stuff over here that you did for your information, I'm going to copy and paste it here. Oops. And you can also use your keyboard shortcuts, copy and paste. That's perfectly fine. If I want to scoot this over, let's say that I don't like it that far over, I can highlight some cells and delete. And I want these to shift left, so I'm going to select shift left, and that way my penny, dime, and quarter are all lined up with my random student chosen. And we would play the same game that we did for our own. So this student had 4 tails and 6 heads for the penny. And we would just enter in our data for each one of those coins, and then also the empirical and the theoretical should all be the same. And remember, we're calculating probability of heads. What's the probability you flip a head? And then compare them. So in A27, compare these two. Talk about the empirical probabilities of each. Talk about why they might be different. Talk about if they are the same, how that's possible. Discuss the empirical versus theoretical. So bringing together all of what we learned in that first lesson on probabilities. For part 3 of the lab, we'll be using a formula that we'll learn in week 3. So if you haven't gotten to week 3 content yet, that's okay. That's why this lab isn't due until the end of week 3. So the first step that we're going to do is skip over to Lab 1 Part 3 tab and answer some questions. So what's the sample size of flipping a coin 10 times? Repeated permutations. So here I want you to think about, if we're flipping a coin 10 times, come up with some pattern for flipping coins. The example that we have, I'll just use the example that's there. Flip 5 heads and 5 tails. Our event would be 5 heads and 5 tails. So I could enter that in. If you wanted to change it up, if you wanted to do 3 heads and 7 tails, just make sure that you have 10 of them. And you have to have at least 1 head and at least 1 tail. So you can't pick all heads and you can't pick all tails. You have to have at least 1 of each. You need 10 total because we're doing 10 flips. In the end part, we're going to use a formula for permutations. Permutations are a special type of counting that allows us to count different arrangements of things. And so this formula given in the lab is, it counts the number of ways an event can occur when there are the same objects. I have 5 heads and 5 tails. So to calculate this permutation, I'm going to calculate a formula. When we do a formula in Google, we're going to use the equal sign. Equals tells Google that I want you to calculate something. We can use Google just like a calculator. It's a pretty powerful calculator. So if we want to tell it to calculate, we enter the equal sign first. So I'm going to type equals, and then I'm going to type up here, I need 10, so I'm going to do 10. I've got 10 things. And I need one more parentheses because I'm dividing by the whole thing. And it gives me a little hint too. You can see with the parentheses that they turn gray. So it's showing me that my parentheses are matching. Now you don't get to pick 5 heads and 5 tails like I just did. You've got to do something different. So you can't pick all heads, all tails, and you can't pick half and half. You got to do something different. So if I hit enter, I have 252 different ways to get 5 heads and 5 tails. Wow. Step 3. Oh, sample size of flipping a coin 10 times. We forgot to do that one. In order to calculate the theoretical probability of my event, I need to find my sample size for flipping a coin 10 times. And again, using the multiplication rule for counting that occurs in week 3, we can see that for the first flip, I have 2 ways. I have 2 possible results, head and tail. For the second flip, I have 2 outcomes, heads and tails. For the third flip, for the fourth flip, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th flip, I have 2 outcomes. So this is using that multiplication rule at the very beginning of week 3. How many different ways for the first flip? How many different ways for the second? How many different ways for the third? All the way up to 10 total flips. Multiplying those together, my N is 1024. Hopefully you'll get that same answer that I will. Everybody's N should be the same. It's the E that's going to be different. So theoretical probability, we're going to take the number in E divided by the number in our sample size, just like we were doing before. And then for the empirical probability, we're going to go over to this Lab 1 prob and count. And we can see that there's a frequency table here. Now, a frequency table just says of what we have on the left, how many show up in our event or in our experiment. And so there's 122 different arrangements of heads and tails. No one flipped 1 tail and 9 heads. No one flipped all 10 tails. but we had 30 with 6 tails and 4 heads. I had 5 tails and 5 heads, so I have 31 total, 5 and 5, out of 122 total flips. So let me flip back over to my part 3. Empirical probability, we had 31 total 5 head, 5 tails, divided by 122 total flips. And so we get that calculation. Now I'm going to do this theoretical probability up here because I didn't. I'm going to go ahead and do it. I need to do 252 divided by 1024. But I'm going to cheat just a tiny bit on this. I've got the equal sign there, so Google knows it's going to calculate something. I'm going to click on the cell and then divide and click on the other cell. This is doing what's called a cell reference, which is one thing that's really powerful in these spreadsheet apps. Instead of having to type in the number, we can just reference the cell itself. Just go up and click on the cell. Then, if something changes, let's say, for example, we messed up and we did, I don't know, too many 2s and we needed to delete some, we can change it. And notice when we changed it, the probability changed as well. So I'm going to do it again to correct my mistake that I just made by taking out a 2. I want 10 2s there multiplied together. And so watch what happens with this theoretical probability number down here. When I hit enter, it automatically recalculates it. So anytime you change something and you're using a cell reference, the spreadsheet app will recalculate to make sure that your numbers are accurate based on the last value in your referenced cells. So you'll see me use cell references a lot throughout because, like I said, they're very powerful. This number has way too many decimal places, so let's decrease decimal a little bit. So I'm going to come up here to the decrease decimal places, and I'm just going to make it so that it's 3 decimal places because that's nice for probability. Notice I can always bring it back out if I want to, but I'm going to decrease it to 3. And then down here in A15, talk about your theoretical versus empirical. What do you notice? How close are they? How far away are they? What do you see? And that concludes the Google version of Lab 1. You should have different outcomes for your experiment. You should have different colors. The formatting of the table should look different. And then over here in part 3, our N will all be the same, but your event should be different from mine. The calculations are all essentially the same. You'll just get different numbers. So I'm looking for 3 sheets filled out, Lab 1 Part 1, Lab 1 Part 2, Lab 1 Part 3. Remember, I did not do this part. You've got to do it. And then to submit your Google sheet, the assignment will take a website URL and it will also take a file upload. So it's up to you which one you want to use. I would say that if you're going to use a website URL, please make sure not to delete it until it's been graded. You don't want to delete that until definitely it's been graded. Because if you delete it and I have just a link, I can't grade it. In order to get a link, we're going to click this green share button up here. Come down to get link, click on copy. They can open. Okay, so we're going to click on this change to anyone with the link. It says anyone on the internet with the link can view. If you want to change it to an editor, you can, but you can leave it as a viewer. I just need to see it and be able to click inside it and see the formulas that you have to calculate. So leaving it as a viewer should be sufficient. And then copy the link. Go back to the assignment. You can insert that link in the assignment. That's with Google. If you're using Excel and you've made it this far through this video, Excel, you have to upload the file. So I'll be talking about that in the next video.